What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Kingdom Growth Podcast, the show where we dive into bold decisions, transformative journeys, and the lessons that shape success. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome our very first guest, Matt Benter, who has redefined the meaning of taking a leap of faith. Matt started his career as a political operative, managing high-stakes campaigns, leading statewide field teams, and driving impactful fundraising. But despite reaching the goals he thought he wanted, Matt made the bold decision to burn the boats, leaving politics behind to forge a new path in marketing. Now, as the founder of the Square Table, he's combining his expertise in messaging and grassroots strategy to deliver incredible results for his clients. Today, we'll hear how Matt navigated this pivotal transition, what he's learned about bridging gaps in business, and being a husband and father that shaped his approach to life and work. So welcome, Matt, for the very first podcast. I'm thrilled and honored to have you here, man. I don't think the intro does it justice, but I'm really curious if you could share just a little bit around how did you get into politics, man?
What's going on, Zach? By the way, I am honored to be the first guest here. I think this is going to be, if I know you, going to be really, really successful, really, really fast. So, whenever someone goes and listens to an episode with a guest with a lot more notoriety than me, and they go back to the first episode, I feel honored to be that guy. So, I appreciate it. But I appreciate the intro. Starting in politics was kind of random. So I was in college when I started working in politics. It was right after the 2016 election, which whoever was alive in 2016 knows how that went and kind of the craziness surrounding that. And it kind of just, it sparked my interest. It was kind of already there, but I decided, I was just more interested, was paying attention a bit more. And I was actually, I don't even know if I've told you this, but I was working at a suit store in Scottsdale so I know Scottsdale is now a popular place, but the suit supply right there in Scottsdale Quarter, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with if you're out here in Scottsdale, is where I worked in college for a bit. And then I met an amazing person by the name of Matt Kenny. Shout out Matt, who worked at the state party here. Met him through mutual people, and he was the executive director of one of the two parties out here. Worked for Senator John McCain for a long time. He was an Army Ranger, amazing person. I wasn't going to say the party, but I guess that kind of just answers the question. But any event, so I came on with him, was interning with him at the start. I ended up taking a full-time role with the party in college still. And then what I kind of shifted to as I grew in college was doing more of the grassroots organizing, going to recruit college students who are interested in making a difference to go do initiatives, right? So that's the thing about politics. I was never, I've always been more of like an issues person than a candidate person, if that makes sense, right? Like much more interested in the specific issues that improve people's lives and advance our country than I was in like, aligned with one person in particular, right? Because I know a lot of people, and we can talk about it in a bit, but like a lot of people view politics as a sporting event between two different teams, and I didn't really view it that way. And so I went to more of the grassroots organizing side, right? Door knocking, making calls, organizing, and recruiting people to do so for initiatives and local candidates. And then I graduated college, and I graduated a political science degree from Arizona State, and lo and behold, which was probably to be expected, graduating with a political science degree from Arizona State, I sat there with my hands up after I graduated, like, what am I going to do? And obviously the natural choice was to kind of continue down the path I was already going. So I had the opportunity to work for Senator McSally, Senator Martha McSally, who was first female fighter pilot in combat in the history of the United States military. So there's a great old clip that I know she would love me shouting out, which is her standing next to Donald Rumsfeld when he was announcing the first squadron going out to serve in combat, and she was right there. So she actually sued the government to be allowed to do that, and she ended up winning at the Supreme Court level. Amazing story. She has an amazing book on it called Dare to Fly. This isn't a promo, I promise, but if you ever want to read her story, it's great. So she was a sitting senator running for re-election. I jumped on her campaign doing working in the field in Maricopa County with those of you who are not familiar, is fourth most populous county in the U.S. Went to work for her for a period of time, doing that. After that election ended, I worked out in Georgia for a bit, doing a couple Senate races for runoffs. Worked on 2 Senate races out there. Came back to Arizona, worked for a governor's race for Treasurer Kimberly Yee, who's a sitting treasurer in the state of Arizona. And so I worked on the fundraising and event side for her. And then I ran a congressional race for Tanya Wheelis out here in Arizona as well, who is an amazing person. And so I was her campaign manager. And then that was kind of my experience in politics. I know that was started out like it was going to be a real long story and kind of made the last few years really fast. But yeah, I kind of hit a point at the end of that political journey where, probably to answer your next question, is, I at the end of that journey, I didn't love the nature of politics and what I was doing. It was very different than what I originally thought. Obviously, there's the monetary. You work really hard and you make a lot of money in politics.
Okay, so well, number one, I think I want to make some, because thank you for sharing all that, number one. But number two, part of the mission, or what we're trying to accomplish with the podcast, is to really partially help inspire young entrepreneurs, those that are already at 7, 8, 9 figures, those that are kind of bouncing around ideas, like they feel like there's not much more for them in life. So if you don't mind, I would love for you to share. I mean, at what age did you get into politics?
I got into politics when I was 19.
When you were 19.
Yeah.
So for everybody listening, I think it's important for them to take that down, because one of the key things you said was you work really hard in politics, you can make a lot of money. However, if it doesn't line up with you, it takes the inner being to then kind of step away from it, right? And so, I mean, with all that being said, and it really accomplished, right? I mean, to do all that at such a young age and then transition is huge. Most people will not do work like that throughout their entire life, right? But how, I mean, because you mentioned leaving politics, but when you did leave politics, I mean, what did you already have something else planned? Was it just hey, I'm a quick exit, I'm leaving? How did you actually make the transition from leaving politics to now moving into, entrepreneurship and running a successful company?
Yeah. So when you say you can make a lot of money in politics, but there's really 2 levels to consider, especially in like the campaigning world. There's really 3. There's campaign staff, there's staff, official staff, and there's going to be the higher level consulting firms, right? Between 20 and 30, you're not going to make a lot of money in politics. You kind of have to grind through that, and when you hit 30, maybe you get a job at a consulting firm, and that's how you start to make a lot of your money. So you really, really have to love it, and I loved pieces of it, but not all of it. And so, when I was sitting there and I was, how old was I? I was 24 when I decided to leave. I was at a place already, right? 24, 25, because now I can't actually remember which one I was, but where I was managing campaigns. This is not a small race either. It was a massive swing race. Both national parties were invested in it, millions of dollars being raised, and I was kind of on a fast track. But with where I was in life, I wasn't feeling fulfilled. I was working 24/7. I was having to doom scroll to find the next news story to comment on, and just endlessly grinding and putting a lot of output for something that I didn't believe was actually moving me forward, and it was actually being detrimental to my mental health. And young in politics, you want to advance, you kind of have to bake, and you're going to be traveling a lot. You're putting in a lot of tough hours. So it is a grind. I worked with some people who, 30 years old, and they lived in 7 states in 7 years. And that was not something that I wanted to do because, just didn't line up with what my goals were. So, yeah.
So you were able to recognize that it's not what you were looking for anymore.
So I was, but it wasn't easy. I think regardless of money or anything, I think we all get really trapped by those situations. My favorite quote whenever I see it pop up is like the quote, like, you can just do things. Like, people don't realize you can just do things. Like, you can just walk away, you can just leave, you can just not do something, and you do feel trapped. And so you feel trapped by your financial situation, right? Your ability to pay this bill and pay that bill and have some money to save. And it's comfort. It's comfort zone completely. So to leave wasn't easy. And honestly, I left with no plan. Like, I just quit, which was a bold move at the time. But yeah.
And that's where the phrase burning the boats comes from, because there was zero plan.
Yeah.
It was similar for us to, and not to get off topic, but it was in 2019 when my wife and I both were like, hey, we're standing in our front yard in Georgia, living in, I mean, we had 9 acres out there. I loved it because I could go out back, shoot my guns, do whatever I wanted to do. And we were standing there in the yard one morning, and I had just left I was running operations for a 9-figure operation out there in Georgia, and I had just left that with zero plan. Like, I sat at home for 3 weeks trying to figure out what to do. And then we just stood in the yard. We're like, hey, we're going to go start a company. And literally, like, moved down to Florida and made it happen. And it was an amazing journey. But I think what you're saying there around, you have the choice. Like, you can, like, the worst, anybody who decides to make a major change, if you think about it, when they make the major change, the worst thing that can happen is they start back at zero, right? So, like, in your case, worst case scenario, you could have likely went back into politics if you really wanted to, or plugged in with people, and it just would have been the same thing you were doing before. But you don't know that unless you actually take action to try to figure it out and kind of move beyond it, right? And that's why, burning the boats and maybe destroying the bridges was obviously the right decision, right? And so, I just think it's super important for people to hone in on that specifically. So, and obviously there was a lot of emotions behind that decision, seeing what was happening. You're 24, 25 years old, and you're probably kind of looking around to see not just what's next, but where can you actually go next, right? And so I'd love to dive into, because we kind of have firsthand experience with not only us but other clients. Like, the marketing is absolutely phenomenal, and so I'd love to dive in a little bit in terms of because the moment you switched from politics to marketing, you recognized there was an issue with messaging there. And obviously, coming from the political world, messaging is probably one of the most important things that actually make a difference as a whole, right? Because messaging controls the narrative, and the narrative will give you the results you're looking for. So I'd really like to hear some of your insights into the gap in business messaging and grassroots organizing. Like, what did you recognize that you were so confident in saying, I can go fix this problem?
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't something I had really noticed until I got into it. The whole thing with starting a political campaign, right? Like, you start from ground zero, and you have a rough outline of what you want to do, and the larger campaigns have rollout strategies and whatnot. But, like, you really are figuring out as you go into meetings with people, as you're talking to constituents, as you're talking with organizers, right? And so you have to be flexible in that way. And when I started, I kind of started doing freelance stuff. I didn't really have an idea of what I was doing. I was like, oh, well, I know how to do some of this stuff, and I know how to do copywriting and messaging and some website and social media stuff, and I'll just kind of start doing it freelance. But very, very quickly, you're right, I did identify that gap, which was very simply put, like, most people have bad experiences with marketing companies, or have had bad experiences with marketing companies. So by simply just providing a good service, listening to their business, getting to know their business, you can make a lot of headway fast, which is what happened. And we were able to grow really fast, and it turned into the company that it is today. But to your point about going back to the messaging piece, I think especially since with the rise of learned language models, you have people using the same cookie cutter approach. Everything is very templated, right? People don't realize, like, when someone's selling a template for something, it's because they've gotten everything out of it that they can. And so you see a lot of companies running the exact same ads for people, and they're just playing the margin game. When you know, I I love Alex Ramosi. I do. He has no idea who I am, but when he came out with both of his books, really $100 million offers, like he created this upswell in messaging and marketing agency and really how people build offers, right? The whole we'll guarantee X and Y time or Z, and it just kind of became this like this system that's just regurgitated over and over and over and over. And so in politics, like people are able, like we know that people can see that. Like when people see the same cookie cutter messaging or towing the party line or just saying the same thing that they think that they want, like they can sense out authenticity really quickly, and it can kill a campaign fast. That first impression is so important. I've worked for candidates who are considered establishment and who are considered more like grassrootsy. The people who are establishment, that opinion happens really, really quickly. And so people don't, especially marketing agencies, don't value how important that messaging is, especially when you're running out tests in there. And so I think a lot of people think, the secret's the funnel, right? You just need to have this trigger and that trigger and that trigger, and you can just spew whatever copy. This person runs ads successfully, I'm just going to remake his copy. People sense that. I think people underestimate it because when they see ad numbers, for example, they see 100,000 impressions turns into 400 clicks, which turns and they start to think about it on a smaller basis like that. But those impressions matter, and even small tweaks to your messaging we found makes such a massive difference, and that's really why we focus so heavily on that front end of messaging.
Because that's and I think that goes into messaging, right? Is the very first touch point for a potential client is what is the first message they see about you, and then it's congruent through the entire process. I think we were reviewing ads for somebody else a couple weeks ago, and it was basic. Like the messaging was just like it wasn't talking to the right people, right? And it's probably and it goes back again to people. I believe in the whole don't recreate the wheel, right? Just kind of run with it. However, especially when it comes to marketing as a whole, I would say like if you have a million different companies, right? Let's say you go into a market like Arizona, and let's just say there's 200 AC companies that are in the area. And there has to be a differentiator between number 1 through 200 because everybody's looking to work with a specific type of company or person. And the messaging can help dictate that instead of, like you said, kind of cookie cutter, if you will. So, and I think the other side of the angle too is how did you bring messaging from the political world into the business world to kind of mesh the two? Was it, what kind of prompt, like why was that a thought?
I think for me it wasn't even a thought because it was just so engraved in how I process things and how I do messaging, because that's just what I was used to. I didn't come from the business world per se. I came from the political world, and that's just what I knew from a very young age. And so, not only, I also didn't mention this, but also in college I was a club promoter too for a few years. And so, Ride Hospitality Group, if you're familiar with Scottsdale, like El Jefe, Whiskey Row, and it's the same kind of thing. Like to get people motivated to perform an action that you want, you just have to speak directly to them. And it's all psychological triggers, which a lot of marketing companies weren't doing. Like one of the reasons I left politics, and sorry I'm kind of going in circles here, but like one of the reasons I left politics was it didn't sit well with me that we would go to 3 different meetings a night. We'd be talking about, let's say we're talking about the economy, and we would go to 3 different meetings and say different things. If you're going to press us on it, we could talk ourselves out of it, right? But even that to speak to certain audiences, you need certain messaging, and you need to be precise with it. That wasn't or isn't still being done at the agency level. Like if you go on Facebook ad library, for example, and you Google and you type in there, HVAC, for example. You're going to see 100 different HVAC companies running the exact same messaging with the exact same creatives.
And I think that speaks to why marketing agencies as a whole have not all of them, but if you go talk to business owners, they've been burned a lot of times by marketing agencies. And it's coming to realization, like you mentioned, they're all doing the exact same thing, right? And so it's just a matter of who's spending more on advertising at the end of the day. Because if it's all the same, it's how many times are you being seen? But it goes back to when you mentioned the wording needs to be specifically to that person. I've always said, I'd rather have an audience in front of me of 100 people that will actually take in what's being said and go implement it, because then those 100 can go on to impact or speak to another 100 and then another 100, versus an audience of, let's say, 10,000 where 1% are actually hearing you, right? It's more hassle, more headache than anything else. And I also, I've had the opportunity to speak with a lot of what we would consider online influencers over the past couple years. And something that always struck me was I would speak with these guys that may have 1 million people following them, right? And everybody's like, hey, I want that. I want to be that guy. And when you get into, we could say, the brass tacks with them, they make $0 on that audience. Well, they might make 10,000 a month on that audience. Versus you can go speak with somebody that has a following of 5 or 10,000 and they're literally making 10x what that person's making. And it boils down to, again, what are you telling your audience?
Right.
There's a gentleman out there, and I can't remember his name. He runs a YouTube channel, and he tried to turn his channel into basically a way to generate money after growing his audience. And what he quickly realized was he made $0 when he actually targeted those people to sell them something.
Right.
Because the messaging to that point was not that. So he had to recreate everything. And now he figured it out and he's got it dialed in. But again, it goes back to what you're talking about is messaging specifically, right?
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, and that's why like effective, precise pain point based messaging is so critical, and why grassroots messaging spreads and it compounds. And so if you can, like in politics, we take, if you're going to launch, if you said, so someone asked me the other day, like we were talking about politics, if I dropped you into a district you had nothing about, like how would you run the campaign? How would you go win? The first thing you do is go to local groups. You talk to people and you start building out your political operation, your coalitions. And by doing that, right, you find the high propensity voters who are the ones who are most likely to go knock on doors, make phone calls, tell their friends, go collect ballot signatures. Same thing in marketing is true, right? You don't want to speak to everyone. You want to, in my opinion, at least, what we found to be really successful is by dialing on those pain points. You can run 10 different ads with 10 different pain points for the same product, but by doing that, you're going to get the people who are passionate, most likely to buy, most likely to engage, and also most likely to be a case study for you or tell their friends or tell their network about the services that you offer. So, you hit the nail on the head with that.
And what would you say, I mean, and I love that, the grassroots style, because I think and you could probably speak more to this, but I think we're moving into a time where, again, going back to Alex Hormozy, how do you create $1 million offer? And how do you do all these things? And it became, I mean, truth be told, in the online industry, right, it's if it's not already, it will be a multi-billion-dollar industry very, very quickly. However, people are jaded, right? So like they've all been through the same process. They see, again, going back to your point of cookie cutter, they've all seen the same exact ads, maybe a different face, offering the same exact thing, and it's a numbers game, right? But what we've also noticed as a whole is people begin to fizzle out very, very quickly if they're not actually doing what they are set out to do. They're just there to collect money at the end of the day. And I think one thing that would be really beneficial, that would speak not only to your area of expertise, but also to the everyday average Joe out there, why? I mean, because messaging and marketing and advertising, that's one side of the equation, right? Obviously, you've been able to build a successful company to this point. What do you feel was the number two or the second most crucial part, aside from just the messaging, the marketing, and the advertising, delivering results there? What do you think is the next thing in line that's actually helped you get to where you are and make you different than the next guy?
So, I think there's two answers. One, I think my internal motivations. I think again, people can see bullshit, and I really truly do care about our partners, about our clients, and pushing them forward. The other thing, in terms of results, because I also think one of the things that drives us forward is that we provide really good service that makes our clients a lot of money, and we're able to build that into case studies and bring more business in. Data. Since 2016, actually not 2016 on the Republican side. Really, Obama was the one who revolutionized data being used inside of politics, and I wouldn't say weaponizing it, but just effectively using it. It took Republicans a while to catch up. And now they're both pretty in line with how important that data is, right? Like they have data on every single. If you have someone knock on your door for politics, they know exactly whose door they're knocking on. They know exactly how likely you are to vote, and they know exactly how likely you are to vote for that person. And they've identified you as a target for one of those reasons. A lot of times, agencies are only caring about the lead number, for example. So a lot of, you turn on, turn on your phone, scroll on Instagram for a bit. You'll see probably 5 ads on a marketing agency guarantee, we'll bring you 50 appointments in 30 days, sort of thing. Because that's the only number that they care about, they're only optimizing for that on the data side. So they don't care about the full funnel and the ultimate number of revenue. They're mostly going back to that first number because that's what dictates whether you will then renew for another month. And so by focusing on the full funnel on the data side, I'm a firm believer in that, one, in our own growth as a company when we track our funnel, but also in our clients' funnels. And then going back to the other part, when I talk about what I feel like has really driven me forward, being people like working with people that they like. And so I try to be as understanding as possible with our clients. And, there's a whole mindset out there of, kind of like ruthless capitalism and, just doing what you need to do. It doesn't really care if you and I both know a lot of people who bake in burn rate and bake in chargebacks.
Yes.
And I've never thought about that. And I believe that to be a good thing because I think at the end of the day, you always aim for zero. You should never build a business baking in that 20% of people are going to want their money back because you don't deliver a good product.
We were, speaking of chargebacks, we were reviewing something, and I don't want to get lost in it, but we were speaking with a potential client and discussing what is the best path forward, right? Because our main focus is really a couple things. How can we deliver the best results, number one? But number two, how can that company make the most money? Like, I understand the whole capitalism side, and maybe that's right, wrong, and different, doesn't make a difference. We know that it makes a difference for that business owner and for their clients. However, to cut it short and just be very direct with it, I mean, one of the topics of conversation was like, hey, we should probably factor in about 45 to 65% chargeback rate. And I about choked. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, so you're working with 50% of your revenue and you're just anticipating the other 50% to go back out? I'll never support something like that. I mean, it's the craziest thing in the world to think of. However, it goes back again to what is the high ticket space. And also that's the other reason why when it comes to payment processors, it's such a nightmare because people have began to, like you said, bake in the chargeback rates and returns and stuff like that. But everybody will work with someone they know, like, and trust, and they're willing to pay more versus just some random Joe on the internet, or even on a service-based business, right? Like, one of our things that we prided ourselves on was we could charge much more, do half the work, and make twice the amount as the quote unquote competition. And the reason for that is and I want to ask you about this as well, but we focused heavily on the customer service side. So it's simple stuff. Like we knew when all of our clients, and this is going back to when we had a service-based business, like all of our clients, we knew when their birthdays were, we knew when their children's birthdays were, we knew everything we could about that person. And again, it goes back to the customer service, because I can sit here and tell you today, when we sold the company, we had insight into the revenue and kind of what's happening. And I mean, it just tanked. Like the person that bought it literally revenue dropped by over 70% within an 8-month time frame, because customer service was no longer a priority. And so you mentioned the service side of what you're doing in the customer service side. What do you think, like, well, I guess two parts. Why do you think it's overlooked in the marketing, in the marketing agency space? First off, and second off, how, how did you build such a solid customer service operation, we'll say, to actually not factor in burn rate or chargebacks or anything like that? I'd love to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, in terms of why people don't do it, I think one, I think less and less people in general have worked in service-based businesses or in retail, or right, and it's like the old joke, like everyone should have to work in a restaurant and a retail store at least once. It, and I think a lot of younger people with marketing agency owners tend to be younger. They haven't done that before, and they think it's just they think it's easy money. So they go into it, they'll read a Hermosi book, or they'll see a YouTube video, or they'll see a TikTok, like, oh, this is a quick way to make 10, 20, 30, 40, 50K a month. You can just offer services and then outsource them. But they're not remembering that, oh, yeah, I can just go target landscaping companies and charge them $2,000 a month and do SEO and ads and hire someone on Fiverr to do it, and my margins will be 75%, because that's the game they're playing in their head. They don't remember that this is someone's business. Like, this is someone's lifeblood. That $2,000 is what they have been losing sleep over for the past year on whether to do, because it means they don't have anything to save and they don't know if they're going to be able to make their mortgage payment the next month. And so people don't realize that. and I think going in with that mindset is very helpful, because, and I know you operate the same way, Zach. Like, if you can't help someone, you'll tell them you can't help them. And I think people are so driven by that, the MRR, that they don't really care, or they think they'll just figure it out. And a lot of people who start agencies, they'll do paid ads, and they don't even know how to get access to a Facebook Business Manager. And then I also think that people who do recognize that, I think a lot of times people don't believe it's a scalable business model, and it doesn't operate at scale, when in fact it does. I mean, you've built companies to where you can attest to that. Like, it all depends how you manage your team too. Like, if you treat your team well and you instill those values in them, and they're going to treat your team well, and you also have to be on top of it. Like, it's not something you can just go by the wayside and be like, okay, I'm handing over client fulfillment, I'm going to go sell, or I'm going to go work on a secondary offer, or whatever it is. Like, you need to make sure that is taken care of, and instilled at an institutional level within your company. That's why the people that I loved working for the most, as I'm sure you can say, like, as I'm sure you can agree, like, they genuinely cared, and they were good people, and they wanted to drive it forward for the right reasons.
And and I also think that's a testament to what sets you apart, right? You're actually working with people that want to make a difference, and it makes a positive difference in your life. And I mean, we can dive into some of that as well, And that's one thing. When we had our landscape company, one thing we never did, we never hired a marketing company, because um, bec- we spoke with so many different owners. They said it's a waste of money. It's just trash. You're not going to get any results, right? So we just figured it out. Like, that was the only option we had. And we can probably speak to some of this, right, in terms of whether you want to call it case studies, results. It's all, I mean, at the end of the day, it's what drives the client's business forward. And we can speak to the testament of just, before before we jumped on the podcast, we were talking about since the first of the year, one of your clients has had how many sales calls to this point? So in the past 16 days, what has it been?
About 30, 31 qualified sales calls for that particular client that we're talking about.
So 31 qualified sales calls, and let's say even if we can average it out and say, and with time and with data, you can dial this in, but figure out what is every booked call worth, right? And when the data
Right.
is dialed in and you figure that out and you begin to look at the numbers and understand, granted that's on the business owner side, not 100% on the marketing company side, like that the business owner needs to dial that information in, but it's again, it goes back to scalable, right? It's like, hey, every booked call is worth $2,500, right? Or whatever it boils down to, because everybody's business will be different. And then it allows for scalability because you say, hey, if we get 10 booked calls today, between who becomes a client and who doesn't, they're all worth 2,500. We know for a matter of fact, it's about $25,000 a day we can generate with 10 booked calls. Another thing that we're in the process of of building another client that we work with intricately. Same thing. I believe we're just about 30 days in to ads. And I just looked this morning, it's over 480 opportunities that have hit the pipeline. And, we're probably within the first 2 months, we'll close out likely about 400,000 in revenue. And I'm future pacing a little bit, but again, it speaks to the testament of how many opportunities are you giving these business owners, or these companies, I should say, to speak with people that really need them.
Right.
And we can speak to that because it's the messaging is very clear when they come to us. It's and I want you to speak to this a little bit, but if you go study what are businesses looking for, right? They're not looking for cold traffic at all. They're looking for something a little bit on the warmer side. And the best way, especially coming from the sales side and understanding the sales side, the best way to do that is to have the messaging on the front end model what the sales team is saying, right? Like if they see messaging that says this and the sales team says this, I've seen teams do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good, talented people, they can switch and pivot those people to, it's almost like a biz op offer, right? Like if your messaging is weird, you have really skilled people, you can get them to transition and become warm. However, the best messaging gets them warm before they ever speak to the team. They're coming there ready to buy. And so I'd love for you to dive in a little bit on how do you get these people to, when they actually speak with the team, they're like, hey, I feel like I know, like, and trust these people already. Now it's just a filtering process.
You're absolutely right. And so you mentioned two clients that we have, and I actually think both of them, they're very different, but they both kind of go to what you're speaking about. So you talked about the one client that we collaborate with that we're projecting 2 months, 400K in revenue for. When we dug into their ad account, I think you remember my reaction. I about threw up. You said you about choked. On the chargeback thing. It was basically what I did on this one. Big name agency, right? We both know the owner, big influencer, charged a few grand a month for ads management. They weren't even tracking conversions. And so the only number that he knew was, I think he said like 800, 900 per qualified call. That was the only thing that
was per lead, not qualified
per lead. Okay, so per
Yep.
lead. And per call, I mean astronomical, right? And now we're in a place where, and by the way, when you say 2 months, we've worked together. So 2 months, you're projecting 400K in revenue. That's because in 30 days, we've generated about 200K in revenue in signed deals. We've done that with about $2,500 in ad spends. And that's crazy, right? That was 3 leads for him. And we're talking about that much money. And his ticket size, anywhere from 10 to 30K. So this is multiple deals. And by setting up checkpoints throughout the funnel, one, I mean, we set up basic conversion tracking. Like, I can't believe they didn't do that in the first place. But by setting it through the funnel, you can see where the issue is. And so if we see, okay, that qualified rate from discovery call to closing call, that's where we have a massive drop off. That ratio is really low. then we know the leads are not being sold to on the setting side. So we know the setters, we need to improve their messaging. If it's before that, if we're getting a lot of leads in, they're booking with a setter, they're talking to them, and they're falling off, then we need to educate them more on the ad side. So by setting up those checkpoints, by being full, and we can do this because we're full funnel, but by doing that across funnel, you're able to see where the issue is and you can improve it. And like I said, we were talking about. I was talking to the first client that you mentioned. We $8 leads or something like that. And he's like, oh, yeah, this is good. This is scalable. This is good. I was like, well, we'll only be happy when we have 1 cent leads. Like, even at that point, I don't know that I'll be happy. That should be your constant mission. And we're able to do that because, like, our model's a bit different, so, right? So, like, we're invested in the company being more successful, and a lot of agencies are just waiting for that monthly retainer. But it does. And to go to your point, like, the numbers, when they're scalable, most agencies will show you that cost per lead number. So for this client in particular that we talked about, was 30-something sales calls scheduled. There's 31 qualified sales calls scheduled this month. $8 cost per lead. That's great. That's what the agency will show you. That's what they'll use to extend their contract. But when we go through the funnel, right, it's not. it's okay. Then 40% of those leads book. So now we're at, right, now our cost per call, let's say it's 70. And okay, then half of them have booked appointments. So your cost per qualified call is now 140, whatever it is. So those are the numbers that you need to know, not just the lead number. And so he was real when we went through our review call yesterday. He was ready to jump the gun when he heard, $7 leads. But when we go through it, it's still scalable. It's only the second week launching ads for him. But the number that you need to base as a business owner is what that most qualified call, that qualified call number is. And so most companies just don't track it, especially the bigger agencies, right? The ones that we know, the gurus, the guys who, have their agency, then they have a course or whatever it might be. It's ridiculous. It's actually awful.
And it goes back to, again, because you could be getting 99-cent leads, right? But what does that matter? Like, a 99-cent lead, it's great, right? Like, you could spend a lot of money on it, but if your 99-cent leads are not who you want to talk to, or the messaging isn't right and the sales team cannot pivot and discuss properly, then it's kind of like a shot in the dark. And it's easy to, it's crazy. The technology we have today, it's so simple. Even if you did a 90-day, if you said, hey, we're going to do a 90-day run rate, basically, like, what do we have over a 90-day period? And then you get to day 91 and you track everything. So you had this many leads, this many booked calls, this many were qualified, this many sales. What does it cost us per qualified call? And also something that you and your team work heavily in is who do we want to talk to, right? So after 90 days, you can see the ideal avatar, going back to using data. I don't think the average consumer, they don't realize how much data is tracked on the internet. It is crazy. Yep. That, you find the right data provider, you can go search exactly who you're looking for. And so you can feed all that back and say, I want to speak to more of this exact person here, and the data will allow that to happen and occur, which again drives down the cost per qualified call. And it also, it goes back to, because I think for any marketing agency or marketing company, and I think you guys are way more than just a marketing agency or a marketing company, but the most important thing, I spoke with, going back to the guru side of the equation, I spoke with a lady a couple weeks ago, and she was talking about, she was building an offer, and she was going to have 4 coaches lined up and all this stuff. She said, I want to get to 100K MRR. I said, okay, that's amazing. And somebody promised her this, like, you can get to 100K MRR. But the question I asked was, what is your monthly retainer then? Oh, we don't have them. They're just one-time sales. Then where is your MRR coming from? It doesn't, because new sales over and over and over again is great, but it's not recurring. Anything can happen or change within that time period. And again, it goes back to people that are just like, hey, we'll bring you the leads. If you can't sell them, sorry, maybe you need to. But it's not true. Again, it's not true MRR, right? And so the other beautiful part about it is the more these clients sell, the more they'll spend with you, right? And so it just helps you out even more um, from a growth perspective, simply because the more money you have to test, the more tests you can do, and the better results you can actually get and dial in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really curious because I think in moving on a little bit, because I think, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but you know, you recently, obviously, and I know I'm like way off track in here, but I think it'll tie back into the
Yeah.
service side.
Yeah.
Recently, you had a child, right? You have a 1 year old now. Do you feel? I mean, how did that did that at all? Because, and the reason I ask this is a lot of people, they're like, hey, they're gonna wait until they're, I don't know, a millionaire to have a child, right? Or until their life is stable or balanced. And I want to be clear, I don't believe in true balance. There's times in our life we need to be balanced, and sometimes we need to be out of balance. Um, but do you feel that that life transition helped you in when it came to the business side and also the service side for clients? Like, do you feel made a difference?
Um, I laugh because I'm actually gonna try. I'm gonna try not to get emotional when I talk about him. But it being becoming a parent is such a beautiful, amazing thing. Every single way it changed my life is for the better. Like it completely changed who I am as a person. It changed my motivations. It changed my work ethic. It changed how I process information. And you know what's funny is, and I know you can relate for this being a father yourself. Like it when you first have a child, like you think it changes you, and it changes the mom right away, right? Because they have that instant bonding connection, and like I obviously felt that instant bonding connection, but the effects of in being a dad, like it compounds. Like the older that they get, the more they become like the more impact it has on you. And not saying it doesn't have for moms, right? But it you get my point. And life is a very life hits you fast, it says, when you become a dad. So from a service side, like it changed, kind of going back to what I said before about how companies view businesses. And I think when you're a 20 to 25-year-old entrepreneur or even older that doesn't have a family and that doesn't have a mortgage and doesn't have a son or daughter to put through school or this and that, like you don't have that same relationship with money and finances, and you don't take that into consideration. And so, like my business, being a business owner, like there's no separating business and personal finances, right? Like it's all tied together. And a lot of people who are younger who have to pay rent and everything else disposable income, or people who are older and single, and not saying this is always the case, and I do not mean to generalize at all, but there's a lot more disposable income there, and there's less people relying on them, right? It's just them, and they can just figure it out. They can go rent a new apartment next month, or they can do this, they can do that, and so I think that's kind of how it's shifted my service mindset. And from a just personal side, like my motivations just completely changed, because it's not just about me anymore. It's, I'm not building this business so I can go be a digital nomad, or I can drive this car or that car, or take this trip or that trip, or I'm doing it to leave something behind for my son. And I know it's all leaving behind, right? But you get what I mean. Like building something that my family can build a life off of. And give him everything I had and more. And so that's my main motivation. And so it's completely changed my outlook on life. And I, for anyone considering it, I highly doubt anyone will be taking this kind of advice from this podcast. But man, it's an amazing thing, and I can't recommend starting a family enough. And it's, yeah.
Well, and I mean, thank you for sharing it that way, but I think it's, again, it goes back to like, you know, uh, people want to wait for the quote unquote perfect time to have a family,
Never
right? Like
perfect.
what?
There's no such thing. There's no such thing. You make plans, God laughs. Classic line, like it's true. And there's never a perfect time.
Exactly. And so it's like, what do you like? Yeah, again, it's what do you You just don't, there is never a perfect time. And if anything, it will be the most imperfect time when you have a child, right? I remember our oldest, when he was born, my wife and I, we had just gotten married, and I said, "Hey, I want to have a youngin," right? Like, and I
Yeah.
was 18 years old, 17 years. Actually, I started saying that at 17, and so I was like, "Hey, I really want to have a youngin," and dude, I was not ready. Like the life I lived back then was way different. But anyhow, I it didn't work for a while. I was like, okay, fine, whatever. We just won't have a kid right now. Maybe it's not intended to be. And literally about 2 weeks after, I said, you know what, I'm done. Because I was leaving for basic training at the time. So I was like, hey, I don't want her pregnant and I'm going to be gone and all this stuff. So I said, whatever, we just want to have a child. And 2 weeks later, she got pregnant. And so, like, and then our son was born. It was 16 hours after I got home from basic training, our son was born. Um, and you're right. The mom has the immediate connection, but also you begin to love to nurture. Um, you begin to love, or you begin to nurture and love that child a little bit differently. And not to get too personal, but from your side, you mentioned, because I think this could really help and be impactful for a lot of people. You mentioned how you want to leave something behind for your son and obviously truly make a difference, right? That's what your family as a whole, we should say. Do you come from a family that kind of had the same mindset, or a family of entrepreneurs, or are you kind of just the odd one out that decided to do something different?
Yeah, so my family does not come from a family of entrepreneurs. Funny enough, I come from a family of people in the legal profession. Honestly, if anything, if there's one profession where most of my family's in it, that's it law. And so that was always the big thing. Like even during politics, I was thinking about leaving. It's I took the LSATs, right? Like I was prepping to do it, and that was something I always felt kind of this like outside pressure to do. And when I decided to do what I did, like it was even the political world was a bit too entrepreneurial for my family. And so, but that being said, they're always been supportive and have never not been supportive. But it was definitely not something that was common. And yeah, yeah.
So did you have aspirations when you were younger to go into the entrepreneur world then? Like when you were in
You
grade
know,
school?
a little bit. Truth be told, I always wanted to be like a sports agent. It was always my goal. I wanted to be if you ask me what my dream job was, to be the GM of the Baltimore Ravens, even though Eric DeCosta is doing a great job. Love that team, love their management, any event. But no, I think what it was is I'm at its core, and you know this from our conversations, like my ideas flow in a million a minute. I'm always I need a safe haven for my craziness, which became the company, right? And it just it's how I operate. I need latitude to be able to do what I want to do, and implement what I think is best. And so that's kind of how it happened. But it was a very organic thing how it happened. It wasn't anything that was planned. It just kind of turned in from something. Hey, I need to pay the bills to this is a real thing. But like you, entrepreneurship, man, it hits you in the head. It hits you in the face a lot. And it is not, especially going back to supporting a family. Like it's not an easy thing. And there's been times where I'm like, you know what, I need to go get something stable and repeatable. But for me, one, I just personally would rather I love being an entrepreneur and all that, but and also your value, right? The amount of money you can make is just so much higher on your own than it will be ever for working for someone else. Just people will disagree with that. It's fine. This is my personal view, at least in my situation. Um, yeah,
Well, and I think it's crazy you mentioned that. My wife and I sat in my office last night about 9:30 and had this conversation around what is, because as much as she denies it, she's amazing at operations and she loves business, right? But she also really seeks stability. And um, yeah, and it goes back to having a stable home that provides some stability. But entrepreneurship as a whole, like, yeah, once you get to a certain point, there is a lot of stability there. But getting there is like climbing Mount Everest, right? And also not, whoever is influencing you or whoever you're surrounded with are also going to have a direct impact on what's happening, not just within your business, but within your personal life, your family life, kind of the whole nine yards. Um, but I'd love to, because I think well, I don't think, I know we live in a world where it's like a lot of people are driven solely by money or they're driven by fame or fortune, right? I've been seeing a lot now where people are like, hey, the famous person just wants to be left alone. Meanwhile, you want to be famous. The rich person just wants to, basically live out their life however they want to. Meanwhile, you're trying to have their life. And internally, they're not fulfilled. They would go back to being broke if it meant they could be fulfilled because they chased the wrong thing. How do you and the the reason I ask this is because you'll respond late at night, like I know you're grinding out and you're putting the hours, but how do you balance the demands of work and family life? Like, what is that? I would love for you to provide some insight there.
Yeah, I think you're right that balance is a myth because however you schedule it out, like you're not if you have an entrepreneurial mind, you're never gonna stop thinking about work, even when with your kids or your family or on a trip. Like for me, the place that I'm most tortured is sitting on the beach doing nothing. Like my brain moves a million miles an hour. There's no such thing as balance, but you need to be very intentional with your time that you do have separate. So one, you do need to separate time. One, for your personal health, whether it's going to the gym. For me, it's like the mornings are my time where if it's an hour that I have to myself where I can read, where I can go to the gym, where I can do what I need to do. I need that time for my mental health. And then in the evenings for me, right, with our son, it's carving out that time, whether it's, usually from 5 to 7. If you try to reach me, you will not be able to. My phone's nowhere near me. I'm very, very intentional with my time, but it takes effort. It's not natural. If you're an entrepreneur and you say, okay, fine, let's take my situation. From 5 to 7, we drop my phone. I'm just going to hang out with my wife and kid, and I'm not going to think about work, and I'm just going to hang out with them. Your natural mindset will not allow you to do that. I mean, you'll do it, but you won't do it effectively. By doing little things. And I was recently talking to a very, very successful consultant. He runs CEO of a consulting firm, founder of a consulting firm, Herb Stevenson. He's been amazing to talk to. And he told me, like, one of the things that he's helped a lot of professionals deal with this issue and kind of the fallacy that is work-life balance, that small things like when you're done with work, when you go to talk to your wife, look her in the eye for 5 minutes. Have a conversation with her, but look her in the eye the entire time. It's something you think is just natural, but by making little intentional steps like that, it makes such a difference for your relationships, because your relationships will start to falter if you're not intentional. Even if you're working twice as hard, but you're intentional with the time you do have with your family, it makes more of an impact than the other way around. And especially for, and my other motivation too, like when I was growing up, my dad has been in corporate law for 30 years. Growing up, he worked a lot, traveled a lot, worked a lot. But I always viewed him as a superhero. I always felt I had 100% of his attention. And if you ask me today, like it was the same as he was around all the time. And I picked up as a kid, and it sticks with you, And so, and the other motivation too, other than just my relationships, like my relationship with my son is so important that I know he'll remember that. I know it makes a difference to be intentional with time. So that's what I've really tried to do is, if I do carve out time, it's not just to do it. It's with the intent of being present and aware, and really focus on it.
And you're totally right around the balance side. That's interesting that you say, because most people, if they had a parent that was gone all the time, they would probably despise that person. At least a lot of people do, right? And they're like, "Oh, woe is me." But something you said that was very powerful was, even though he traveled a lot, he was still viewed as a superhero, number one. But number two, I feel like he was always there, right? And so it goes back to again, like being intentional, right? Which is something I struggle with. Like, I'm not even going to lie. Trying to be intentional with my time.
Hard.
Yeah. So And it's crazy you mentioned that. My wife and I were just doing something the other day. We were trying to like study love languages to really understand like what is that? Like, because I don't know. And when we did it and we figured it out, it made so much sense on why certain things were done certain ways. And it was like a realization of like, hey, if I can love this person this way, like even if it's less time, it's more impactful, like you said, because it's more directed at exactly what that person needs. Um, and also too, going back to the entrepreneur world with a young family, being married, you know, a lot of times the support system is crucial, number one, but number two, really, um, you know, going back to the first 7 years of a child's life, and I even think this is true for businesses as well, like young businesses, the first 7 years are crucial. Of course, your first year is probably the most important, but a child is shaped within the first 7 years. And so whatever is happening from 0 to 7 will determine in large part what their future is. Now, can you reprogram and rechange or reprogram and restructure it later on in life? A lot of us have, right? Like we've figured it out. But if you can set the right foundation from age 0 to 7, it will we have both situations playing out in our house. Both of them grew up in a different lifestyle, a different way. And so like we can see the difference it actually makes. Um, and with that being said, as we kind of come to closing, because I know I've had you here for a while, if you if you could go back, let's say you go back, whether it's through political times, now, college, anything like that, if you could go back, is there anything you would change?
No, I don't believe in that. I mean, it sounds very like cliche. Oh, I don't believe it, but I don't. I mean, I'm so personally satisfied with where I am in life that I wouldn't change it. You know, at the end of the day, I'm my own boss. I truly believe that I do help the people that I work with. I have an amazing, beautiful wife, amazing, beautiful son, and I own an amazing, beautiful home, and my life is good. You know, it's amazing. So everything that happened, I've learned, and I was actually trying to make this point earlier, but I got very distracted as I tend to do. Um, but I like repeat your question, please. Let me re-answer that because my mind
If you
is not
if you
working.
could go back, so if
Yes.
you could go back to
Okay.
whether it's
Yes.
political time, anything like that, would you change anything?
Absolutely not. Like I truly believe, as cliche as it sounds, everything happens for a reason, and I can't imagine my life playing out any other way. All the experiences I've had, all the failures, really have built who I am, and that's, you know, a couple of lessons I would have, and a piece of advice I would have for people who are thinking about making that leap. It really scared about the consequences. I've not been the perfect entrepreneur, not the perfect business owner. Like it's nothing I've done before. I've messed up many times. But all those things true. Like you really do learn more from failures than you do from successes. And I wouldn't have it any other way. And I'm gonna mess up more. I'm not gonna make all the right moves. Not gonna make all the right decisions. But I am a firm believer of never making the same mistake twice. And that's the biggest piece of advice I would have is that when you see those issues, stomp them out, fix it, whatever you need to do. Um, and, and, and yeah, and to kind of change notes a bit, because I know we are wrapping up, but I mean, listen, you and we could talk for hours, Zach, because I haven't even asked you any questions. I have a lot of questions for you, but um, going back to something, because I think we've talked a bit about, you know, what if an entrepreneur, prospective entrepreneurs listen to this or thinking about making the jump, or maybe you're in good example that you're going to like. Maybe you're in real estate and you're thinking about starting a real estate offer, or you're thinking about uh, teaching a service. Or you're like, hey, I know this thing in real estate that can make a lot of people money. I just want to provide that. The problems don't get easier as you grow. They get bigger and the stakes become higher. I was talking to one of my mentors, Jordan, probably makes 10, 15 times more a month than I do. And you know, I was talking about this issue with scalability that I was having at the time. This is about 6, 7 months ago, and and you know, and the pressure and how I wanted to step out a bit more and how I wanted to make it safer, more consistent. And he literally just laughed at me, And, being at the level he is, those mistakes are a lot costlier because you're dealing with your family, but you're dealing with your staff's family, and you're dealing with their motivations, their personal situations. A lot of people rely on you then, and the stakes are a lot higher. And so, and your reputation's higher and all that. So, setting those foundations, and the reason I say that is when you talk about setting foundations, it's like anything. In a political campaign, you have your main core messaging. Andrew Yang, for example, right, ran for president, mayor of New York, UBI, universal basic income. That was his thing. He probably talked about foreign policy. I don't remember what he said about foreign policy. That's what I remember, and that's something he built into his campaign and he built his messaging around. And that was a pillar. You have to have those pillars in your business. You have to have those pillars in life. But by doing that, you need to make sure that you have to reinforce those pillars throughout the time of building your business. And so if those things, like for us, customer service, communication, good, decent results, really amazing results in those situations, but you have to instill those things at the beginning and put the effort in, be intentional, like with your personal life throughout the entire build.
Well, and you end up working, you end up weaving the two together, right?
Yeah.
And it goes back to, again, like you mentioned, around Andrew Yang and universal basic income. We live in a world, in a society where people can, you have, again, going back to you have control. You have total control over who you are and what your brand is, right? And I'm a firm believer that no press is bad press, because at the end of the day, like, bad press is influencing a certain group of people, and good press is influencing another certain group of people. And so it's literally like this wheel of just, it's just a wheel of just how you're portraying yourself. And truth be told, a lot of people that portray themselves a certain way in today's society with social media, they don't, John Maxwell was I believe it was John Maxwell talking about this. And it may have been somebody different, but he was talking about how there's so many online coaches that do different things. And what he quickly realized was they're not doing what they're teaching, meaning they're not being intentional with their own time. They're not taking their own advice, but because they've messaged and branded a certain way, people believe they are. And the reason people believe that is the results are kind of speaking for themselves. But if they could slow down, take their own advice, and this is a message for me as well, slow down, take their own advice, implement it, they would be so much further ahead than what they are today, right? And so, because at the end of the day, nothing great was built overnight, number one, and like you said, the stakes may be higher and mistakes may become costlier. However, if you view failures as a learning lesson, you'll forever be further ahead than the next person that views failure as a setback. I really firmly believe that failures are actually steps forward because it's one less thing you have to worry about now. Once you fail at it once, just don't do it again. You learned, cool. Let's just kind of move beyond it, right? And so that's one of the biggest things. And so what would you say in closing here? And we definitely have to do this again, man, where it's the other way around. What would you say one thing that somebody could do, whether it's a business owner or just somebody let's specify it for business owners. What's one thing that you think, or one practical step that you could leave them with that they could either implement in their marketing journey or an adjustment they can make? What's one piece of practical advice you could leave them with?
And if I was going to give advice to someone who's growing a business, or thinking about starting this, I would say to be product focused. You're right. There's so much messaging from so many different people that it's not like you can go buy up all the ad space in your neighborhood, right? There's going to be countless voices in your target market's ear. Social proof is so important. And the only way that you're going to get social proof, you're going to get case studies, it is by providing a good service. And so don't get lost in the sales piece of your business, which is very easy to do. And I say this to someone who is in the sales space, so I know that's probably, but I'm so focused on it that I get lost in it for months at a time. Not a good thing. I would not recommend that to anyone. One of my biggest issues is getting too deep into the delivery and our structure where I get lost in it for months at a time. But I cannot emphasize the importance of it enough. And so I would say really focusing on providing a good service. If you're thinking about being a business, and let's say you decide that SEO is a good way, I'm going to start an SEO company. Okay. You're going to start an SEO company, and you're going to make clients, and you're going to get 1K a month from all of them, and that's how you're going to build the business, right? The first thing you should do is not figure out how to get clients for it, is actually learn what you're doing, and learn how to talk the talk and walk the walk. So that would be my biggest piece of advice from a personal from a business standpoint.
Well, I think that's huge because at the end of the day, most people that we've seen and recognize is they're either great at the marketing over here and horrible at sales over here, or they're great at sales and horrible at marketing. Maybe they're great at both and they suck at fulfillment, right? Which is product. Like very rarely do you see someone that is, they're good in all three areas. That's why it's crucial to bring the right people in to make the right decisions, because you have someone that's marketing and messaging focused that truly cares, right? They have to truly, because the messaging that on the ads, right? If whoever's writing it can't connect at a micro level with the audience, it'll never work, right? Like you have to be able to kind of live in that moment of like, this is who I'm talking to, and kind of settle yourself in. That's why actors are actually really good at sales most of the time, because they can fit in any environment and they can pivot and move. They just become who that person is. So like you're in terms of focusing on product, it's like allow, not only focus on that, but then bring someone else in to do the other stuff where you're weak at, right? Like, because if you can have someone great at marketing and someone great at sales and you're great at product, you'll go so much further, right? I'd rather have 25% of $1 billion in revenue versus 0%, or even 100% of 100 million. I'd rather have 25% of $1 billion. But again, it goes back to growing and also, and I think we spoke about this a few weeks ago when we were in person around kind of being in control of things, right? And how sometimes that can limit our own growth and we don't even recognize it until we step back just a little bit. And what would you, final piece of advice, what would you say to the other entrepreneurs out there that also have a young family? And you already led into some of this with the intentionality, but what's one piece of advice you could leave them with?
I would kind of go back to what I said before. Two pieces of advice I would have, but they're kind of tied together. One, again, be intentional with your time. Don't focus on work-life balance, because as an entrepreneur, there's no such thing. If you work just 9 to 5, and you're like, all right, 9 o'clock clock in, 5 o'clock close out, you are not going to make money. You can make some money. You're not going to scale to where you have financial freedom for you and your family. And it's just not reality, because you're going to have to message clients at 8 o'clock at night. You're going to have to message them at midnight. When I'm up with my son at 2 a.m., I'm just blasting out emails. I do a lot of my work after they go to sleep. So the time that you do have with them, just be intentional with it. It really makes a difference. Your child will remember it. Your wife will remember it, because you're going to have to, and honestly, like doggy friend and friend, like if you're going to have to, all right, Saturday, I got to work for a few hours, build up a little goodwill. So, you got to be able to say that. But yeah, I would say being extremely intentional with your time that you do have separate, and don't focus too much on work-life balance. Do what you need to do, but make sure the time that you do have, and make sure there is time, is as intentional as you can. But like personally, for me, like I value way more providing a stable home and life for my family than I do anything else. And so sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. And so I would never tell anyone, oh, well, I have this and this, and I can't be intentional. You do what you gotta do. Just do what you gotta do.
And I think Myron Golden said it best, which is when you're talking about balance, he said, if you're broke, you don't deserve balance in life.
Yeah.
Same thing, like if you're rich, you're not going to be balanced. And if you're wealthy, again, you're probably not going to be balanced. You will go through these seasons in life where sometimes it's this way, sometimes it's that way, sometimes you get in the middle. But overall, I think, balance is a facade um, because again, whatever balance is for you is different for somebody else, right? Like balance for some may be one intentional hour a day with family, and 13 or 14 hours building a business that's gonna it's gonna leave them in a much better position, right? Versus someone else, balance may be 4 to 6 hours on a Saturday, very intentionally with their family, and 80 hours throughout the rest of the week that are focused in on other things, right? And so, Matt, I truly appreciate you taking the time with us today, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if you don't mind, how can people get in touch with you? Where should they reach out to you? Obviously, I think it's very clear you do marketing, marketing services, but a whole lot more than that. I can speak from personal experience. But how can people reach out to you, man?
Yeah, absolutely. This is awesome, Zach. I think you're gonna be really successful with this. You're good at it. You have a natural talent for it. In terms of getting in touch with me, our company, the Square Table, is just thesquaretable.com. We didn't talk. Another conversation for another time. There's an entire story behind that I think loops in everything that we kind of talked about. But thesquaretable.com, find me there, and then also on LinkedIn. His name Matthew Benter. It's on there. In terms of listen, I give great advice, awful following it. I always tell people to focus on their on their imaging and their branding. Personally, don't have don't have the personal brand Instagram or anything like that. The company is on Instagram at Join the Square Table, so you can find us there.
Cool. Yeah, and we will definitely, because I've only heard a little bit of why it's the Square Table, so
Yeah,
we will definitely have to dive into that at another time.
yeah,
And that's how we came across. I'm pretty sure that's how we met you, was because of LinkedIn through email marketing. So
yep.
anybody for email marketing, it obviously works. And and yeah, so with that being said, I just want to say thank you to everybody that is tuned in. Hopefully, you can pull one, two, three, or 100 things out of this episode. And I think the biggest thing is take what works for you, leave the rest. You don't need to take it all. What's worked for Matt is not necessarily going to work for you, but I guarantee you, if you're intentional in listening to this, there's a lot of stuff you can pull out and implement into your business, your daily life. And the stuff that you think won't work, then don't try it. But never, as they all say, the graveyard is full of a bunch of dead dreams and wishes and hopes. You don't want yours to end up there. So until next time, thank you.